Okay, I think I'm live. Let me just confirm. I think I'm alive now.
I think I'm alive now.
Yep.
I think I'm alive now.
Let me just open the chat, the other video. Hello, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Hello, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yes.
Hello, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yes.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Just a second. So I think the chat is working well and fine. Just let me check once again.
Check once again.
Yes. Okay, so yeah. So hello everyone. Welcome back to the channel. And once again, before we start, a small disclaimer as usual. I am not a geopolitical expert. Just someone who likes to talk about geopolitics and world history. So, without any further delay, let's get started. I have a set of 50 geopolitical questions here. Some of my friends compiled this for me. So, let's see how much we are able to cover, how many videos might we need for this. So, yeah, without any further delay, let's get started. Coming to the first question, the pattern would be the same. I would be giving a bit of the context, then the reason why this particular question was selected, and then how we can go around the same. So yeah, coming up first, why do countries care? Just let me check. The voice is fine.
Countries care. Just let me check.
Yes. So yeah, so why do countries care so much about who controls the sea routes? Okay, great. If I have to start this question, I think the first stop would be the case of India and China. One via the case of who control the sea routes matter a lot. This particular area, the area between Malaysia and the Indonesian peninsula, this is called the Malacca Strait. The majority portion of the trade which China accrues, it happens to this particular strait only. China being here, if we have to imagine, suppose a ship or a vessel is coming from the case of maybe Middle East, Africa, or the case of Europe, they have to either go from this particular area, or they have to take some long routes around this, or the much longer route around here. So based upon that, Malacca Strait is something which offers a much viable route for the case of China, and that's where the most majority of trade between China and the rest of the world takes place. And that's the key area for which we can start the case of why the countries care so much about who controls the sea routes. For example, if in some particular future the Malacca Strait gets choked down, some reason, maybe the case of Suez Canal crisis comes about, maybe a tanker or a container gets positioned in this particular stance. I think it happened in the case of Suez Canal when one of the tankers was positioned in a particular way, which choked the entire stream of Panama Canal and sorry, Suez Canal, and something can similar happen in the case of Malacca Strait also. At that particular time, the majority of the trade with China then is doing with the rest of the world, it can be hampered a lot. So having control around the Malacca Strait, having control around the South China Sea, that's something which matters a lot. And that's why whenever India starts to increase its engagements around the area of Andaman and Nicobar Islands, China often fears a lot. India, Andaman Nicobar Islands, it has often been quoted as the unsinkable aircraft carrier of India. If I have to start making a bit of notes here. So, China, Malacca Strait dilemma. Then the case of Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So, these are known as the unsinkable aircraft carrier of India. Suppose India positions their military base somewhere around the case of Nicobar Islands. The current news also, which has been going about the Galathia Bay. At that particular time, India can easily use the aircraft and the other vessels to directly reach the case of Malacca Strait. If some case a war breaks down in a couple of years, that's where I feel the case of Andaman Nicobar Islands as being a strategic point to counter attack China in the case of a war. That's something which often comes about in the news, and that's the reason why Indian administration has been very much, I would say, vehemently supporting the case of Galathia Bay being used as a source for industrial base and also the case of defense base. Yes, the environmental impact assessment and the case of overall biological diversity has been in the news a lot, but the debate is on. NGT had been ruling the case, if I'm correct, that NGT has given clearance for Galathia Bay. So yeah, that's something which is in news, and that's why countries try often that around their island areas they can have a control in the overseas so that they can manage their sovereignty and also counter the people. If I have to build up another example for the case of sea road controlling, I think last week only this particular news was in the news, and that's why this was the first question, which was more aircraft carriers and also other vessels to give a push to Iran so that they can concede and a particular action can be taken up against Iran. Seeing this particular thing happening, a particular press release was taken up by the case of Iran, where they said that they would choke the Persian Gulf for a while, and 20% of the oil which comes for the rest of the world comes from the case of the Persian Gulf area. So this particular area gets choked down, or any other issue builds up here. That's something which impacts a lot to the rest of the world. That's why this particular incident and this particular question was in the news, because Iran had threatened to seal the Persian Gulf, wherein 20% world's trade happen. Just give me 1 second. Just 1 second, please. So yeah, coming up next ahead, another thing which had been in the news last year, especially, was the case of Red Sea. In the Red Sea, the Houthis, the rebel from the Yemen, they had been controlling and had been dominating a lot in this area. They had been taken over. It had been taking over the sea vessels, the Israeli ships, and even the case of other countries which had been navigating in this area. And that's the reason why sea routes control is something which becomes very important. Last year, there were some missions also with the name of Prosperity prosperity pardon my English, Guardian, by India, if I am correct. Prosperity Guardian operation. It was a US backed operation which happened in the case of Red Sea. There was an India backed mission also in the Red Sea against Houthi. Was there a name for this? There was no specific name, but the Operation Prosperity Guardian, that was the case by USA, which was done in the Red Sea, once again to control the seas and control the activities which were being done by the Houthis at that time. That's the reason why countries have been always trying their best to control the sea routes. The case Trump has been talking a lot about taking the case of Panama once again into the US mainland. Panama had been in the debates a lot last year also, sorry, a couple of centuries back also, when Panama was finally being taken over by USA. The deal which they had pushed in with the case of people who were living in the Panama City. So that's the reason why majority of the countries try to control the sea routes. If I have to even take the case of climate change and Russia here, Russia is someone which is very happy whenever the case of climate change comes about. because as the climate change would come about, the Arctic ice would start melt. The sea routes, which are in this particular area, the Siberian Sea area, and the connecting area towards the case of Greenland, also the Arctic Ocean per se, that's something which can open up. And with Russia having the capabilities of nuclear led submarines, and also the case of crushers, which can be used to break down the ice, that's something which also, that's something which had been in the news. Russia angle can be used here, Arctic ice melting, and Mr. Trump always the case of Panama. So that's the first question. Why do countries care so much about who controls the sea routes? Coming up next here, why is oil still geopolitically important despite a renewable energy push? I think the better answer here, in whatever knowledge I have, would be the case of consumption and ROI aspect. Might have to do a bit of a recheck here, but that's what I think. That when the case of renewable energy comes about, the initial setup costs, the factors of production which are involved in the build up to renewable energy, that's something which is very problematic, and the erratic overall supply. For example, in the case of a backed solar power backed energy, the issue of containing the power, then storing it, that's something which is an issue which has been faced by many countries a lot. And that's the reason why the concept around grid power connectivity often comes about. That's where I feel that the topic or this particular question has been pitched in here on why oil still holds geopolitical importance. If we once again trace back to the map here, whenever the discussion around the climate change comes out in the case of climate of the Conference of Parties, the UNFCCC, a common debate has been between the global north and the global south. Global north always pushes for the case of renewable energies, having more and more greener energy sources, whereas the case of India and the other global south countries, they have always said that USA, Canada, the United States, the UK, and other countries in Europe, they have done their bit when it comes to the extraction of coal, and they have already reach that particular phase of per capita income and the industrial revolution output which they can have achieved for their overall betterment. Whereas when it comes to the case of India and other global south countries in the Asia region or the African region, they are yet to reach that particular level, the minimum threshold of per capita income. So to achieve that per capita income levels, they have to still use the case of oils, the case of fossil fuels a lot as compared to the use of renewable energy. Yes, renewable energy can provide a push towards the case of climate change and help the world in the issues around the carbon stress. But when it comes to the case of development and overall consumption requirements, the idea of oil as a geopolitical hedge, as a geopolitical importance, matters a lot. So that's what I feel when it comes to the case of this question. I might have to confirm it, but this is the context which I feel might be the reason why this particular question has been asked. Coming up next, why do wars far away affect fuel prices in India? There was a very great statement in our particular budget and economic survey this year, the case of strategic indispensability, which every one of us needs to have. So, if I have to sum up the case in general when it comes to supply chain, China gets tied up, say, to the case of India. India then ties up to case of USA, US to UK, say to Saudi Arabia, and this once again gets tied to the case of China. That's how, in general, the supply chains operate across the world. And if there is fault in any particular line here, suppose if I can introduce another topic here, maybe Saudi relation. I think if I can add here, suppose UAE, and then I can add here Saudi Arabia, then I can add here suppose an African country, and then I can add the case of UAE. So suppose issue comes about in the case of UAE and Saudi Arabia, which happened the last month. the Yemen issue, which had been brewing up a lot. There has been reports that Yemen rebels, the Houthis, some of the factions have been backed by the UAE. So, with suppose friction being created by the Saudi Arabia and UAE strained relations, the entire supply chain gets distorted. That's where the case of having strategic indispensability, wherein countries are independent from others, but also are sufficient enough in their own self that they can't be just removed from the entire supply chain and people have to depend upon them. That's something which has been in the news recently. Circling back to the topic on why wars have been affecting the fuel prices in India, this is once again the bit of context which would be required here. Because the way the countries have been interconnected with each other in the case of trade and the case of geopolitical turmoils, the word we often quote here is the maturing maturing globalization. Sooner or later, whenever the interconnectedness, that's something which starts to get a fracture, the impact is felt across the spectrum. For example, if I take the case of where it was a far effect, if I take the case of maybe the far effect area of here, Venezuela, last month, Mr. Trump had taken over the administration of Venezuela initially, then had installed their own puppet government here. The president being in much tune with the case of USA. Technically, Venezuela stands far away from India. However, India has had a good relation with Venezuela in the past. We used to bring in oil from them, and then also we used to then stop on. Just a second. Hello, Arun bhai. So yeah, we used to bring Venezuela oil a lot. Then we had applied sanctions once again. It was once again on, once again off. And with this Trump administration once again now taking over Venezuela, the next statement which came from the case of Mr. Trump was that you have to start now taking the oil from Venezuela and stop the case of oil from Russia. So that just shows how fuel prices starts to get impact whenever a rupture or a friction gets created across the world. Any particular issue which comes about can impact uh, each and every one of us. For example, the case of Suez Canal I was mentioning, last year or a couple of years back, a particular container had been positioned here in the wrong way. It entirely choked the Red Sea at the time. Suez Canal was choked down, and any and other fuel or oils which had to be taken from, say, Saudi Arabia or UAE from this particular Mediterranean route, it had impacted a lot. That's the reason why whenever a issue comes about in a particular region, the way supply chain has been interlinked with each other, people are dependent on others. That's something which tends to impact the entire world. Coming up next, how does a conflict in the Middle East impact global inflation? So yeah, the third and fourth question are very much interlinked with each other. If I have to just add on to the same case, whenever the just a second, oil as a commodity sees a shock wave, inflation always tends to rise because the supply and overall demand side fears that start to grow up a lot whenever the case in Middle East starts to grow up, and that's why the inflation gets impacted. Last year also, when the Red Sea issue was happening about, the Houthis had been controlling the Red Sea, they had been stopping the ships, there were delays being introduced, and overall supply chain and overall the indices around trade started to see an impact. That's the case where the global inflation started to peak. Oil prices had hit a huge tank at that particular moment of time. So that's why whenever the conflict in the Middle East comes about, it tends to impact the rest of the world because the majority of the oil comes about from this area and the trade part. Any trade which has to happen to the case of South Asia, it has to go through this particular Red Sea area. So if the Middle East is not stable, it could tend to impact the rest of the world. Now that we have also mentioned the case of Middle East, particular note here, Middle East as such is a geographically incorrect word because this is how a globe looks like. And when it's a globe, technically you can't just pinpoint an area which is east or a particular area which is the west. The reason why Middle East got its name was the case of the map being European centric. It was something like this, in the way which the map of the pre-era world during the back of dominance by the UK used to happen about. And I mean, imaginary line if can be drawn here. It was seen that this is particular area being the east area, and then somewhere around in the Middle East comes about. That's how they had devised the case of Middle East being as a geographical name. However, the technical name should be West Asia. So yeah, Middle East is just a name which the UK and the colonial powers have given to them. Coming up next, Ed, how do small countries matter so much in global politics? I think Taiwan could be one of the best example, which can be quoted up here. Uh, every one of us know the supply chain issues once again. The way TSMC has been able to fabricate chips, the level of precision, the level of accuracy, and the amounts in which they have been able to do. USA heavily depends on Taiwan, and any or other confrontation or takeover of Taiwan by China, it would tend to impact the entire world when it comes to the demand of semiconductors and supply chain. If I have to take another small country, for example, so Mauritius was in the news recently. If I can locate Mauritius, yeah, here. So Mauritius was in the news last week. So the concept here is there's a Chagos archipelago here, somewhere around here. I think maybe if I can find the exact location, Chagos archipelago. So yeah, this particular area actually was initially part of the Mauritius back to the time of the World War era and before that also. However, this region was taken over initially by the British. And that's the reason why it's written here, the British Indian Territory. Here we also have the same island with the name of Diego Garcia, which is a huge military base of USA. And this particular country, why it holds so much geopolitical importance right now, there had been discussions going in the past. In 1966, actually, if I have to write the case here to give a bit of a context, 1966, UK had given USA Diego Garcia at the time for initially 50 years, and then a statement around 20 years plus extension was also given. But recently, this is in news once again, wherein UK post the opposition and demands by Mauritius wants to give back this area, to give back this area, and have a lease for the said island for the next 99 years. That's how a very small, important country leads to driving global geopolitics, wherein Mr. Trump now quotes that please don't give this particular area, don't sign this particular lease because it holds a very huge importance for USA in the Indian Ocean and for them to carry on their own activities. For example, if they have their base in Diego Garcia, anytime or the other time they can very easily go and attack their enemy around here. So that's the reason why small countries tend to hold so much power in the global geopolitics. Coming up next ahead. Just a second. Okay. So why do powerful countries interfere in others' internal affairs? Why do powerful countries interfere in others' internal affairs? I think the best answer would be legacy. Like they have the geopolitical clout. Just a second. Yeah, so coming up ahead. So I think the cases of legacy, geopolitical clout, and being big enough that no one comments to you in the end. That's the reason why powerful countries tend to do. They try to increase their sovereign interests. They tend to gain on their initial investments. Plus, add on to how much power they can. For example, if I take the case of the old and old mighty USA, the reason why they wanted to take Greenland, as was quoted by Mr. Trump, was geopolitical sovereignty. They have an ambition of constructing a golden dome here. If I can show you the map here, golden dome. It's always in news, thanks to Mr. Trump. It's something which they want to create a golden dome missile system for defense aspects. That's why Greenland was something which Mr. Trump was talking about a lot, that they want to take over this area. Internal affairs, once again, Iran. If USA could have been able to capitalize on the issues which had been happening in Iran the last month, wherein the protests were happening, and if they could have toppled the government in Iran, they could have placed a government which would be much to their own liking, much to their own capitalistic adventures, and it could have ended up benefiting them in the end. So it's all about geopolitical sovereignty. It's all about economic might and trying to gain the best from the rest of the world. There's a very fine quote which my friend often quotes, that the so-called global powers tend to live or preach an idealist world, but themselves themselves follow the hardcore realist path. So that's why that's something which often gets up in the news, and that's why I feel that yes, because they have power, because people don't tend to speak them a lot, that's why they keep on doing what they can for themselves. Just a second. Yeah, so coming up next here, if I have to once again quote here an example, I think China's boiling frag strategy is something sits very well here, because that's a classic case on why and how we see that big countries keep on doing their stuff and incidents, and people often tend to avoid this. So China often do small adventures. Uh, you have to take the case of issue of Tibet, Aksai Chin, and the case of China continuously changing the names in Arunachal Pradesh. The Chinese policy around the five finger and one palm, wherein they claim the area of Aksai Chin, Tibet, Bhutan, Sikkim, and they often try to build up pressure slowly in these particular areas, whether it be the case of South China Sea. And at that initial particular moment, countries often don't react, thinking it's a big country. If we tend to speak something, something can happen. But when you don't pressurize those countries, or you don't, I would say, stand up against the bully would keep on bullying you, and at the end of the day, the power gap becomes so huge that a huge impact or a huge loss comes about. That's the same case when the idea of boiling frog strategy comes about. And if you place a frog directly in a hot boiling pan, it would die immediately. But if you keep the frog in a pan and then slowly start to increase the temperature, slowly and steadily the frog starts to adapt, and it doesn't say much. However, the skin starts to finally burn, and finally the frog dies. That's the case how the boiling frog strategy gets linked to the case of big countries doing things for their own end. It can be even linked to the case of Hitler also. Hitler had been doing the same thing. People were not saying them anything. The policy of appeasement, that's something which they had been following about. And at the end of the day, the World War II was a reason why the World War II was a reason for the countries avoiding the tactics which Hitler had been doing. Coming up next, why are sanctions used more than direct wars today? This has to once again get linked to the case of economy and overall idea behind connect with each other. You can't just go and bomb Russia right now. USA, for whatever it might claim, they can't just go and attack Russia, despite the fact that yes, the Ukraine war or the other issues have been going about. So at that particular case, what you have in your hand is the economic power, the economic choking power, and that's where the idea of sanctions come about. Sanctions had been imposed in Venezuela long back ago. It has been imposed in Iran over and over again. That the nuclear issues which Iran has been posting about, that needs to be stopped. For the case of Russia, also sanctions have been in the news a lot, and the reason is because a full-scale confrontation of war leads to losses at on just one particular end, both the ends. Your economy, your money, your manpower, that's something which goes for a toss. If the case of Iraq has to be linked, when USA had entered Iraq and had bombed the Iraq, it led to their own issues, own structural debt and loan failures also at the end of the day. So that's why sanctions become much more effective than that was today. And we have seen that this has been the norm in the recent past, wherein countries have been applying sanctions instead of directly going to the war because they feel that sanctions as a tool helps to display their denial to the things which have been happening about and to drive a much better impact without having lost at the own end. Whether it's a good move or whether it helps them in the long run, it's something which is up for debate. It's a long standard question. But yeah, that's the reason why sanctions are used much more directly than the wars today. Coming up next, Ed, how does social media influence international conflicts? Okay, that's one of the best questions, I think. And I think that the case of Operation Sindoor is something which can be linked here very easily. I think we could have done much better in the way we were able to position the news when it came to the case of Operation Sindoor. A particular statement which had been quoted by many geopolitical analysts was that India was at a bit of a slow pace when it came to revealing the actual things which have been happening about. If we would have been able to pressurize Pakistan at the global front by using media as a legitimate power, that's something which could have helped us a lot. If I am remembering correctly, when the Afghanistan Pakistan issue also came about, Afghanistan was able to posture a much good stance in the initial run up only against Pakistan by creating memes and also talking about the video release, the rhetoric being debunked. I think yes, the way we are able to send our delegates outside to the rest of the world to talk to the people, talk to the diplomats, and to have a diplomacy going on. Instead of that, if in addition we could have also doubled down on the use of social media effectively, that's something which could have helped a lot in providing a good posture to India's stance in the case of that issue of India Pakistan. The way the fake news had been coming about, the way some political leaders from the outside world had been claiming for such issues happening about. If we were able to use social media to the best of the extent, it could have been a very good move for our side. And I think yes, this is something which needs updation. And even the current regime and even the current administrative officials, they have been talking about. Some of them are friends. They are working on this particular aspect that this rhetoric and overall speech of geopolitical news and debugging of fake news is something which India needs to heavily push towards and have that action so that it could lead to the best of the nation. Just a second, please. So yeah, coming up next here. Why do countries spend so much on defense even during peace? Countries spending so much on defense during peace. Hmm. I think it's, it's a more philosophical question than anything because I think at the end of the day, it's about defending the sovereignty and driving growth and capabilities against the enemy states. Peace is something which is not guaranteed in the current era per se. The way terrorist activities happen across the border from Pakistan to India, and if I have to even take the case of European countries, the way things can go for a toss at any moment. Middle East is something which is an issue. We see the wars happening about the non-state actors going up against each other. That's something which always keeps on going and going in the news. Well, that's where I feel that yes, uh, continuous spending in the domain, whether it's still the peaceful era, that's something which is very much important. And I feel countries need to spend on defense even during the peace to ensure a much, I would say, safer stance and a better credibility. Because the wars of today are, if gonna happen, would be messy, and if we lack continuous improvement, we will be left behind. With the tech aspect rising a lot, and the use of cyber attacks, and the case of technology being used, the drones being used, countries need to spend more and more. The R&D needs to be tanked up much more at the way which it is currently, and that's the reason why countries tend to spend much more on defense, even during the case of peace, to ensure a longer term peace. Whereas where the countries which are targeting them, they can be deterred, and any attack, if they would try about, would just be a loss for them. That's why this as a question has been positioned here. Coming up next, how does geopolitics affect everyday products like smartphone and cars? So once again, this is a topic around that thing of supply chain. Whenever the supply chain gets for a toss, all of these issues come about. If I have to bring up a practical case, I think the rare earth and the way China had been imposing restriction, that's something which can be quickly discussed here. Restrictions. So if I have to take you to the map, rare earth minerals of the country, China tops the stance right now with 44 million tons of reserves in rare earth. India at this particular time is just a fifth only, and this is how the data looks like currently. I think I can't zoom it right now. So maybe if I can copy this image and add here. Yeah. So this is how this particular image looks like. China nearly holds. Image is not clear. Just a second. And India currently is at 6.9 million tons only. Though we are at the fifth level when it comes to practical feasibility, that's something which is a very issue right now. And that's the reason why the Indian government in the recent budget has been pushing for the case of rare earth minerals. We have implemented some industrial corridors in the states of Odisha, Kerala, Andhra Pradesh, and Tamil Nadu towards the rare earth minerals. The semiconductor as a supply chain has been, which China has dominated a lot, and with India giving push towards electric vehicles and the case of smartphone development also, that's something which needs to be focused about. The case of China plus one strategy, that's something which we often hear when it comes to the case of smartphones and cars, because the countries have now started to move away from China, and they have been transitioning towards the countries of Vietnam, Korea, and India, and UAE also for their needs and their overall development. That's where the case of geopolitics affecting the everyday products like smartphones and cars comes about. I think we're done with 10 questions right now. That could be the first part of the video, part one. 1 to 10 questions. Would cover up the next set of 10 questions very soon. So, yeah, thanks a lot for watching the stream if you were here. So, yeah, thanks a lot. Would catch you soon once again the stream with the next set of questions. Thank you. Bye. Yeah, thank you.